I am now going to introduce our wonderful presenter today. Assuming the role, I'm sorry, I should say Dr. Kimberly, is it Grotewold? I did not ask you that
Yes.
earlier. Thank you. Dr. Kim or Kimberly Grotewold. Assuming the role of AI literacy librarian at Texas A&M University San Antonio on September the 1st, 2025. Goodness. After joining A&M San Antonio as its education librarian in July 2018, Dr. Kimberly Grotewold has been borderline obsessed with AI's role in librarianship and teaching and learning more broadly since early in 2022. Her dissertation for her PhD in learning technologies, defended in November of 2024, involved a multi-strategy study of educators' integration of and decision-making around generative AI into their professional work. In-depth interviews with faculty and academic support staff, e.g. librarians, were integral to this research. Modeling intentional and transparent generative AI use has become foundational to her practice. So please allow me to warmly welcome Dr. Kim Grotewold.
Thank you. And thank you for being here. Thank you, Sarah, for that great introduction, and Nancy for managing the technology issues with this session. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk with you today. So there's a lot to cover. I'm going to jump right in. So I do have a poll to kind of get a sense of who's here and what your experience is. It's a Slido question. The information for how to join is on the screen. And so I should be able to kind of see responses, get a sense of how often you have been involved, either teaching students how to use generative AI or using it in your workplace for other kinds of tasks. And that will also kind of help me frame how we talk about things during this session. Okay, so we have a good number of participants, and it seems like most people are in that sometimes range. Honestly, that's kind of where I am today. I do a lot of stuff, in my own work and how I use generative AI, and I'm always thinking about how to adapt that into what I do with students, faculty, and staff. But sometimes it's kind of hard to fit it into either the time that's available or make sure that it kind of meets people where they are and what their comfort level is. So that'll also kind of come up during the session today. So the framing for this particular session is information literacy, general student success. We can expand that out a little bit to like staff success and librarian success. I understand that there may be non-instructional people in this space, and I want you to feel comfortable, considering the ideas that I present in the context of your particular practice and how that fits into how AI literacy, generative AI literacy fits into that. So it's mostly going to be non-technical. We're focusing on prompting rather than coding or model building. We're also not talking about agents. There's a lot out there about agents right now, but that's not the focus of today. I also want to address our learning goals. So you'll be able to describe at least one method for instructing students or others in using generative AI tools to develop and refine literature search strategies or other types of information searches. Apply the principles of intentional generative AI use, citation, and disclosure to guide your professional practice, and adapt the approaches presented to something that you do in your everyday work. So something that I was thinking about a lot when I was preparing for this session is, we talk in libraries about information literacy, right? But if we kind of expand that idea out, there are all of these literacies that kind of have come about both like before information literacy, there was the broad idea of literacy, and then there's information literacy, digital literacy, technology literacy, media literacy, visual literacy. You can kind of keep going on and on. And really, these are all, I think, very much interconnected and very much what we do in libraries. So I'd like us to kind of keep that lens in mind as we go through the rest of the presentation. So I kind of realized with a shock that at the end of August this year, it will have been 30 years since I earned my MLS degree from the University of Maryland. So in that time, a lot has changed, but there's really been a lot of constancy in terms of the skills, the ideas, the concepts that are inherent to all of our work. So, I listed some of the information literacy frameworks that kind of I came up through. Like, I was a school librarian first, so the Big Six is on there: information power, National Educational Technology Standards for students. We also, once I became a higher education librarian, academic librarian, I started looking more broadly at information literacy standards and how those go across the disciplines. But what I really thought was interesting is here's a statement from 1989 from the ALA Presidential Committee on Information Literacy. Oop, did I just lose my slides?
We're seeing your file explorer right now.
Oh, yeah, that's not good. How are you right now?
We can see your slides again.
Okay. So in the statement, you'll see a lot of what should resonate today. And especially, I would say the last sentence, they are people, information literate people are people prepared for lifelong learning because they can always find the information needed for any task or decision at hand. And I think over time, we've really moved from a very skills-based linear approach to information literacy to more holistic, more what do people need to do to be able to succeed in their environments outside of school, for example. So if we take this into AI literacy, a recent definition was put out there by Leo Lowe. You're probably familiar with that name. But it really talks about, again, AI literacy is the ability to understand, use, and think critically about AI technologies and their impact on society, ethics, and everyday life. And it has components of technical knowledge, ethical awareness, critical thinking, practical skills, and societal impact, which, again, have been common threads from all we do. And then the ACRL framework for information literacy, if you're not aware, they're in the process of revising the current framework to hopefully release that one, I would say, within the next year. There was a comment period for it in May for people who wanted to give feedback, and AI is definitely being recognized in the framework as something that needs to be realized and adapted for. So kind of in the framing of what I've said already, I'd like you to take just a minute or two and think about what is your own information literacy or technology literacy story? And then how does AI or generative AI fit into that story? And the image on the screen I thought was on the slide is particularly instructive to me because I think of, every time that we look to what is changing or we think, okay, we need to embrace change, that's always going to involve some kind of taking a chance. And so, we'll talk a little bit about benefits and risks of generative AI in our work. But just, again, if you could kind of think about where you are, if you want to put something in the chat, that's great. And just, again, what's your way of thinking about how AI fits into what we do? So a couple of my premises to set the stage is that AI, generative AI, is not going away. The toothpaste has been squeezed out of the tube. It's not going back in. There's been too much money, construction, things like that have been put into it. So it's not like it's just going to get turned off. Again, as I mentioned, AI literacy is an extension of all the literacies that have come before and that have been part of our work. To really develop AI literacy and informed decision-making around AI use, you really have to have some level of use yourself to be able to kind of understand where the strengths and limitations are. And, generative AI use presents risk. All internet use presents risk. There are many things in life that present risk, and we have to acknowledge that and not force people to use it, but just also kind of be mindful of there are many things that we do that have risk involved, I would say. Technological advances almost always introduce possibilities for both good and bad outcomes. So how can we maximize the good, minimize the bad? And then while the capabilities of the AI applications and tools change, how we think about them doesn't necessarily have to. We still kind of engage in those values-based thinking processes. However, how people engage with information is changing and has changed over time, and AI is going to continue to change that. And that we really just need to embrace that we are all lifelong learners. We can learn from each other in this session. We can learn from the students that we encounter and the other staff and people around us in our workplaces. So, a lot of tensions come up in AI use. The one that I would like to just highlight here, and this is something, I try to talk about all of these when I work with students or staff in workshop settings, but the personalized support and loss of privacy one, I think is particularly valuable. If you've used an AI application in a chat that you've been using for over a time period, you realize that as you use it more, it gets to understand you more. And so it's going to give you more personalized support, but in a sense, you're also giving up your information to that tool. And how comfortable are you with that? When I talk with students, it's like, well, if you're going to use one of these tools, think about maybe not using your university email for it, or think about if there are tools you can use without actually setting an account. But then you're going to give up not getting, to keep track of your history and how you've used it and to build on past work within the tool. Access to vast data versus copyright and IP infringement is a big issue that concerns us in libraries. All of these things are important. And it's something that there's always both sides to the coin, I would say. So the next, I want to talk about a few things that I've actually done in workshops with students. So we kind of set the framing. Now we're going to look at some specific examples, and then we'll move into disclosure and accountability. So this QR code will take you to an example of an interaction that you could potentially, have your students replicate. I used Claude Sonnet 4.6 medium and Sonnet 5 high thinking. So if you're not familiar with some of those specific settings, you can, adjust settings within the general AI chatbots, but this will let you kind of follow along as I show some of the prompts on the screen. So one way to use a prompt, or to, have students use a prompt. And again, if your campus only uses Copilot, you could have them use Copilot. If you have access to the AI framework at the system level, you could use that. This can be adapted to different tools. So it's about that narrowing, refining a topic. We know that sometimes students come in and they have this really broad topic and they don't know how to narrow it down. So I'm doing academic research on whatever broad area, and then, they can ask for narrowed topics. They can ask for multiple narrowed topics. And then that gives them the opportunity to evaluate options, make a choice, use that agency, try to apply some kind of evaluation to what choice they're making. It also kind of promotes an iterative approach so that students can continue to engage in that same chat conversation, think about like what the next step might be. Some of the negative possible outcomes are that, you know, they might get a range of limited topics that makes them not think about something that they would have otherwise thought of. I try to encourage them, hey, you don't have to choose one of these, but it gets you past that I don't know kind of phase. And then, you know, sometimes students may think, oh, well, my idea is not good enough, whereas, you know, I should use one of the AI ideas. A next step for this would be, you know, if they're, again, continuing, they can move on from just the narrow topics to what are 5 academic research databases and 3 scholarly journals that would be important to include. And so again, if they don't have a lot of experience with academic research, you can kind of give them this framing. Hopefully they, you know, have at least the understanding, and you can teach them about what databases are, what journals are, but it kind of breaks that initial barrier. And then again, you could do even a follow-up prompt after that about suggesting keywords and phrase searches and search strategies specific to those databases. But sometimes the chats will do that without you actually prompting it. So again, kind of benefits are breaking down that blank page that I don't know what to do. Negatives is, again, students maybe not developing their own strategies. Some more structured prompting, role, task, audience, and output format of this 4-task or 4-step process or approach. I would say task and output with very specific information about the outputs are the probably most valuable parts of this prompt. You don't have to use all the phases. And I will kind of show you an example of this one in a minute. But this is where it lends itself more to the AI tool actually doing a bigger chunk of the work. And so then you as the librarian or the instructor could focus on, okay, how do we analyze this output and compare it to other ways we could find information or other sources that we might want to consider that weren't suggested through the results from the prompt. So here's the prompt. If you're looking at it, you know, yourself in the slides or on the doc, you can see it as well. So here's where it's actually asking for an annotated bibliography. Many of you have probably helped students with doing annotated bibliographies. So this is where, you know, it's kind of bleeding over into that, across that edge of, okay, now the AI is doing this. So one thing I'll point out is just, you know, asking very specifically about what the format should look like APA 7th edition. And then if I am showing a prompt like this, I always, you know, emphasize the DOI or the URL because I want my students, or I'm going to go check those sources to make sure they exist, that they're not hallucinations. Can, you know, I access the full text for the cited sources? How well do the cited sources align with the recommendations from the prompts? Like in one of the prior prompts, it recommended, you know, certain theorists that maybe don't show up in the annotated bibliography. So you can start to kind of dig in and ask some of those more deeper questions. However, you know, it takes time to do this kind of activity. This isn't necessarily a one-shot instruction session kind of thing that you just plunk in there for a short period of time. So I'm going to take a breath and I'm going to move over into citation, disclosure, and accountability. Because these 3 words, you see them used together a lot, and they are very related, but there's slight differences among the 3. So, you know, you can have citation without necessarily accountability, or disclosure is not the same thing as citation. So let's tease this out a little bit. So citation. Most of the big style guidelines, format manuals have come up with some suggestions for how to cite generative AI. APA came up with their first guidelines in 2023. They have added some clarification in 2025. MLA actually came out, their 2025 guidelines came out a little bit before the APA guidelines. Chicago is still kind of using their 2023 guidelines, but they do advocate for putting in indications of generative AI use into like your notes fields if you are using Chicago format. So common elements to include in the references of the work cited are the AI tool with model or version used, the company that made or provides the AI tool, the date of the use, and then citing either the overall AI tool or the specific chat with the URL. So if you're using like Claude or another chat and you want to make the link to the chat available, you have to click a button that says make it public. Now, making it public, I've discovered, because I tried to do it for this session, won't necessarily give, if you create the link, I tried to open that link then from a phone that wasn't logged in and it wanted me to like log into Claude. So I'm not sure how public those links actually go out. So I'm a little curious about that. But I also, I kind of tell this to students as well. There is that extra step of like, okay, well, now I'm at least making this available to people who are using this AI chat tool. It's not just my private space anymore. Thinking about function and how you used the AI tool also plays into citation, but it's more, I think, important when we talk about disclosure. So disclosure is not the same thing. And I like this disclosure statement from the University of San Francisco. Their Gleason library says an AI disclosure statement is a summary that describes how AI was used for an assignment or research project, even in ways that haven't been cited. And that's the kicker right there at the end. So you have citation, which you think about, when you publish something or you write a paper if you're a student, citation is supposed to be what's actually included in the paper. It doesn't always include, your background research if it doesn't contribute directly to the ideas that are in the paper. So in that way, it's a little bit similar, because if I use Claude to give me ideas for a research article, there are recommendations now for me to disclose that, even if those, even if it's not something that directly comes out of the AI tool and goes into my article. So I wanted to point out some resources that have come out about disclosure. Carrie Weaver, who is a librarian for the University of Waterloo and also has done some work with NISO, has put some work out there on disclosure and kind of categories of disclosure and what you should be, being transparent about your AI use, and has been giving them names, like words that you can use: conceptualization, methodology, information collection, data collection, execution. So there are lots of ways you could be using AI that, depending on who the audience is, what you're doing with the work, disclosure may be expected as part of transparent use. GADET is another one. It's GAIDET, declaration generator. Both Weaver and this other group have a declaration generator. I kind of want to go out and show it to you because it might make it a little clearer. I just hope I can get back to my slides. So we're going to all cross our fingers here, and I'm going to go out to it. So, So this is what it looks like. It lives in GitHub right now, but there's also an article associated with it. And then who delegated the tasks? I mean, that's you as the generative AI user. You've delegated something to the AI. And then like which LLM and version was used. So we can actually roll this out. Thinking. Oh wait, this is just a rough. Let's say I used it for idea generation and no. Say, I'm going to say evaluation of the novelty of the research. I'm going to go down and just say I'm not using it for any of these things, but I'm just going to, okay, proofreading and editing, summarizing, and reformatting. Seems weird to me to use AI for ethics review, but that is an option. And then supervision. I'm not going to add anything to that. If you click generate, it creates a statement for you. This one's pretty basic. According to this particular taxonomy, these tasks were delegated. And then responsibility for the final manuscript lies entirely with the authors. If you do submit an article, you want to, there's usually a statement where you claim responsibility. I think it's a good thing to do with students too, is to emphasize that, even if you use generative AI and it's a supportive process, you still need to verify. You're the one responsible because your name is on it. GAI tools are not listed as authors and do not bear responsibility for the final outcomes. That's a good point, right? And it's put here in the generative disclosure statement or declaration statement. The one thing I don't particularly like about this one or the one that Weaver has put out there is that, if you do use more than one tool, it's not quite clear how you would go through this particular form. You'd either have a bunch of separate ones of these that I guess you could combine after the fact. It's not quite very seamless to try to put more than one AI tool in here. Obviously, this is geared more toward the scholarly. If you're working with faculty who are looking to publish, this is something that, most of the journals are looking for or require AI use disclosure now. But I'm kind of working on thinking about, okay, how do we translate some of this to everyday student work as well? So if you're interested in some of that, I'd love to talk with you a little more about that. Let me escape out of this. Let me try to pull my slides back up here. So, okay, you see my slides? Are we good?
Yes, we're good.
Awesome. Okay. So, I know we're covering a lot here. Let me go back. Okay, so we talked about the disclosure statements. So here, again, getting back to that, the author takes the responsibility. AI is not recognized as an author either in, the copyright copyright cases that have gone through the court so far as I'm aware. According to the academic style guidelines as well, they tend to, emphasize that while even if you cite generative AI, you cite the company that created the AI tool, or, in some cases that piece comes later in the citation. It's still a little wonky, and I think some of these things are going to evolve over time. One of the frameworks that I saw being used, this was from Garcia Ramos. She was using this with K-12 students, is having them go through some of that disclosure about how they used the tool, why they used it, what they used it for, what tool it was, but then also what percentage of the work was done by AI. And I think that's a difficult thing to kind of think through, but at least it, it starts that conversation of how much is really my work versus the generative tools work. I always, whenever I do something with generative AI, I'm always going to think of whatever comes out is a draft. It's never the final thing, or it's a conversation starter. It's not, again, it's not the conclusion of whatever I'm doing. It's always important to verify accuracy, check for missing perspectives, bias, sycophancy, misleading information, etc. We did a workshop for staff here at A&M San Antonio. When two of the arts and sciences librarians were involved, and we had an activity where people were tasked with looking at social media posts or other form of content where there was something that was either misinformation, disinformation, very biased. We threw in some AI generated things as well, kind of trying to, again, give people practice in looking for some of the things that might, give you a clue that this isn't completely accurate or credible information. We, presented on SIFT and lateral reading and also some AI identification kinds of approaches. Is your voice maintained? That's a big thing with writing. And then if we think about it in a teaching and learning context, how much did using the AI affect your learning of the knowledge of the concept? Because, with some of like the annotated bibliography example, if I don't require going back and really interrogating the sources and what they're saying versus what the generative AI tool is saying, I could, just say, oh, I have the annotated bibliography and never really learn anything from that content that's in there. So, I think, we've had the concerns about social media and like the content in social media. We've had concerns over time about different technologies introducing ways that, information can be manipulated or changed, or our path toward finding quality information changes. But we always kind of come back to those same frames of like, how do we evaluate this? How do we apply a critical lens? How do we think about, what does this mean for my knowledge of this area as a whole? So I think it's useful to continue to apply some of those same, or all of those same concepts, really. So let's see. So here's an example of a disclosure statement based on like what I did with these slides. So the first ones are basically the prompts that I showed you and the ones that you can look at. I also used some Copilot to help me plan what I was going to talk about. I didn't quite, maybe I should have gone with the exact plan because I feel like, I kind of crammed a lot of just different pieces into the same presentation. Hopefully through some of the question and reflection, we'll tie some of these things together a little bit better. I gave Copilot my slides, asked it to find the references, put it into APA format, and then create the references list. I went back and edited that heavily. But it did at least, I think, pull most of the sources pretty well. And then, Microsoft PowerPoint Designer is built in. So some of that was used. And then I'm saying probably about 10% of the work, obviously that's subjective based on my perspective. But I did, verify accuracy of all the information included and then did a lot of revision. So I am fully responsible for this presentation's content. So what I'm hoping that we can do is give you a chance to share some thoughts here. So it's a Padlet. I'll give you a minute to pull it up. And then I will bring up the Padlet so we can see, what people are saying. For the Padlet, there is usually a plus sign on the screen. You click on the plus and you can post your thoughts. I may have said it so that you need to put your name on it. You don't have to put your real name if you don't want to. I've divided it into sections with different questions so you can add your feedback to the specific section. And hopefully it kind of provides a springboard for us to maybe continue some of this conversation and work. So I'm going to,
Kim,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but do you happen to have a link, or could you send me a link to the Padlet and I'll drop it into the chat for everybody too?
Yeah, awesome.
Just
Let me
in
do
case.
that. Okay. So I think this is the ugly link. I think there's a shorter link, but I'll give you this one. Let's see if this one works. I think I can put it in the chat. Okay, see if that one works.
Yes, worked for me. Thank you.
Okay, so then, you can click on the post and you don't need to put a subject. You can just write what your response is to one of the questions. So what stood out to you as useful from this presentation about teaching responsible generative AI use? Someone put the disclosure generator. Okay, someone said they send their authors to it all the time. Awesome. So once you type, you can just drag your post where it belongs on the screen. It's pretty user-friendly if you haven't used it. Okay, and then I did go to, so I don't know that we had active learning every 10 minutes. That's my my little task to work on I went to at least part of the active learning, the learning session. That was a great session, but this is kind of similar to the muddiest point, like what remains problematic about discussing generative AI use in the context of information literacy and research. Yeah, okay, hallucinations. And then the last question is just more, if how are you using or teaching generative AI if you want to share that? Again, so we are learning from each other. I think that's always a great opportunity for us. Yeah, I love some of these. Yeah, okay, great. Okay, structured prompting. I will say the structured prompting, it was kind of an amalgamation, like stuff I put together from Claude, other stuff I had seen, plus, me, what works for me. As far as the structured prompting, there is a school of thought that says really the prompts don't matter that much because, especially if I've been using a tool for a while, I've heard of people just putting like lots of PLZs for please and things like that once it kind of understands you. Or, using the prompt to ask for a better prompt is another strategy I've heard of. Also with the disclosure statement. So I did sort of a variation of this presentation that was really focused on the disclosure part and accountability and citation part with a mixed group with faculty, instructional designers, staff at the Katie conference. And the one person was like, oh, I use the AI to generate the disclosure statement. And I'm like, okay, but then do you add another, do you add that to your disclosure statement saying you made the you made the disclosure statement with AI, and it kind of feels like that, turtles all the way, like how far are we going to go with this? Turtles all the way down kind of thing. But yeah. Okay. All right, lots of good things here. So I'm going to talk about a few of them. So hallucinations, yes, really helping students understand some of those strategies like SIFT or lateral reading, looking for other sources to corroborate information. I try, when I'm doing sessions with students, I always try to emphasize that you never want to just use one source. So if you think of your generative AI output, oh my gosh, why is my screen doing this? Sorry about that. Okay, I need to not, I move around too much. I bump something. I kind of lost my train of thought too. Like, good research doesn't just rely on one source. The generative AI may tell you it's pulling from multiple sources, but I still would I would consider it one tool, and you're going to verify information across other sources. There was another one I wanted to point out. I went to a business class, a business ethics class, and we talked about the problem of retractions. So if you do, if someone includes a hallucinated citation into their article and it still gets published, and then someone cites the article with the hallucinated citation, it can have this corrosive effect over time over the scholarly record. And so that was something we talked about a little bit. They wanted to talk more about AI slop, which was fine. But we kind of started with, okay, what does this mean in a research context if we're not checking our sources, and how that can kind of get passed forward as bad information and affect things down the line. AI has become more expensive to use while dropping in quality. Yes, I feel like I've experienced that. Or I have, full disclosure, I do have a paid, the $20 account with Claude. I do not have it with ChatGPT, but I try to experiment across different models. And, I got cut off of ChatGPT the other day, just trying to do something that I thought was pretty basic. And I thought, what was going on? But I think it is related to that. We no longer have some of the unlimited use than we used to have. Knowing what collections the AI platform is pulling from. Yes, we talk about this a little bit. One of the things I did with one of our arts and sciences librarians is, we went, and actually with one of the first year, or not first, it was in a first year seminar class with our student success librarian. And we went and we showed the regular databases. Well, we showed AI as a way to get those ideas to kind of frame searches. And then we showed, regular database searching. And something I do try to mention in the sessions is, the AI tool doesn't have access to everything that's in our library databases. That's behind paywalls. So, kind of trying to get them to understand that it's not just, they think they're getting everything, but they're not. And that can be something that's a little hard to have students understand. I want to just kind of see if I can hit some more. Where to draw the line between using AI for prompts, research strategies, and then conducting further research for students. Yeah, and that's where, kind of trying to help them establish those purposeful, intentional uses. What am I going to use AI for? When am I going to stop and not just take what it gives me? So I think that's a really good question. Honestly, some researchers, scholars, you kind of need to ask that question too. That they may be relying on it more than what we would necessarily expect. So I think it's a broader conversation. Someone's teaching copyright compliance with generative AI use. Excellent. I love that. Okay, brainstorming is a jumping off point for idea generation. Yeah, I mean, those are kind of the easy things that, like, I was hesitant to even present on that today because I figured most people might already be doing that, but it can creep up to that line of what's like completely, oh, it'll do the next thing for me, right? It usually offers, hey, do you want me to do this overview report? It's hard to say no sometimes, I bet, for students who are time crunched, right? So how do we kind of frame it so they are in control? Maybe it's them, you want to be in control of this. So set your intention of what you're going to do and then don't go past that. And I think, the disclosure things are hard. So if we start kind of leaning into disclosure and what that means and transparent use, I mean, I don't want it to necessarily discourage people from using generative AI if it's going to be a helpful tool to them, but I do think it's not easy to keep track of everything you're using. And it's important, but trying to build some of that practice is also going to be challenging, but also maybe slows them down a little. All right, 5 minutes. I think, okay, I want to go back to my slides really quick. And because, oh, actually, I skipped over the one that I wanted to show you. Oh, no, I didn't. It's the bonus slide. So some of you asked about, okay, well, where are the tools pulling, like where are the AI tools pulling their information from? So there are some AI tools that are designed specifically for scholarly literature research that are pulling from open access publications or preprints. So, they may not be peer reviewed. But here's a list. I didn't jump into this today, but you have a list to explore now. Some of you have probably used some of these. And these do at least do better than, they're not pulling from Reddit or X or whatever. So yeah, so these are worth looking into, and the subject of another workshop at some point. So I'm going to come back to this, and I'll leave this up there if there are any other questions that people want to put in the chat, or if there are any in there that I missed and Sarah wants to read those for me, that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Kim, Dr. Grotewold, for your wonderful presentation. I'm just going to wait, a little while to see if any questions, comments come in. Also, any attendees at this point, you can unmute yourself if you're comfortable. We have about 3 minutes if there are any questions or comments that you would like to share. I have been monitoring the chat. I didn't see any come in during your presentation, but I did make sure that everybody has the link that they can go and access your slides to follow up, especially for that bonus slide with all those great tools.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm doing the instruction librarian thing of like counting to 10 in my head,
I
making
know.
sure everybody
I
has
do the
time to
same
ask their
thing, right?
questions.
Yeah.
Want to be respectful. Okay.
All right. So on
Uh,
my thank you slide, I am headed out for vacation tomorrow. So unfortunately, I will miss like the AI sessions. I know there's at least one, I think tomorrow, maybe another one today. I'm really, if you want to connect with me, last week of July, beginning of August, that would probably be a time when my brain's a little more open to that, and I will be back from vacation, but I'd love to continue this conversation. And you have my contact information on the slide.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grotewold, for your wonderful presentation. And thank you all to all of our attendees. Please join me in saying thank you and giving a round of applause. All right, recording is stopping here.